So I'd like to thank entire Avial team for giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge with all of us here. Yeah, I'm going to talk about Docz. I'm going to talk about Gatsby. I'm going to talk about how to do the documentation in the Gatsby app using Docz. So I'm sure that there is a lot of fun learning, and we'll just get started. So yeah, as we just started speaking about two important stuff over here. One is Docz and another one is Gatsby. So the idea here is like to take you through the importance of Docz and then what Gatsby is, and then show a sample app that I have created, a small app that I've created using Gatsby, and then how Docz can be integrated to that. And also we'll do some hands-on of to understand Docz a little bit much more deeper. So that's the agenda. Feel free to ask questions, and we can always keep the session interactive. So one thing I would like to get started with is like whenever we talk about application development or a product development or software development, there are a bunch of terminologies that come into our mind, right? So we talk about planning, designing, coding, testing, a lot of stuff. While talking about all this stuff, I think if you're talking something least about something is documentation. However, that is one item is going to bite us back if we are not putting enough focus on doing that. So documentation is also an integral part or integral aspect of application development, product development, software development, whatever you take. Like your engineers require documentation to look into. Your customers require some customer-facing documentation. Your marketing salespeople require some certain amount of documentation about your product. So it's pretty important, and it's better that we kind of start doing it right. Now, if I ask myself, what is the reason that we don't put so much focus on the documentation, as much as focus we give on coding and testing and things like that? I think from my experience, what I feel is like tooling is probably one of the biggest concern, and it's also like nobody likes to work out of the band. What if, there are situations like as you code and you can create your documentation right out of the code, so you don't put much extra effort in doing that. And also the tools and the environment that you use is very much developer friendly. So the developers also really don't feel, oh, this is too much of work to do. What exactly Docz is? Docz is an open source tool, a library. It has lots of stars on GitHub. It's really, really popular. The best thing that it does is like you can document as you code. And that is probably the number one criteria for someone to look into documentation seriously. It is highly customizable. It means you can actually make it based on your need. For example, you want a particular theme because your application is in a certain theme. You want the documentation to be a themeable way. You can do that themeable. So you want to look into a certain folder for picking up a documentation, certain files you want to ignore. You can do all sort of things. All sorts of customizations are very much possible. It is MDX based. We are going to talk about MDX in a while, but at this point, the MDX is a kind of format. It's no more new, but it's kind of a new baby in the town, but still not very new. So if you are from the React world, you would have heard about JSX a lot, the funny syntax that people talk about for building React component. So MDX is some mashup between Markdown and the JSX. So you can put your Markdown for any kind of text-based documentation. Plus, you can put your React component inside that, and in the MDX format. And this flexibility, as Docz is MDX-based, gives a immense amount of flexibility for a developer to pull in any component into the document directly, the same component they're probably using to build their UI, right? We are going to see some of this, in our hands-on session. It is pluggable. You can plug Docz. Then it is React-based, of course, so you can pull the React stuff, put the React component. There is a TypeScript support, so if you're a TypeScript lover, you can always look into Docz. You can actually use it, and it is Gatsby.js powered. So it's powered by Gatsby.js. So we are going to talk about Gatsby.js in the next slide. Gatsby goes really, really well with Docz, and Docz goes very well with Gatsby.js. So we are going to see about Gatsby.js a bit, like what exactly it is, and then once we start looking into the code, I think it will be the right time where I can bring like some of the history of how this Docz was built, what is the technical stack behind that, and how it is powered by Gatsby.js. But at this point, these are the attributes that we can actually keep in mind. The next thing is about Gatsby. So Gatsby is a React.js based framework. The way that Gatsby came into picture is from the fact that there are a lot of people who are interested in doing static site development. What is a static site or static app? Basically, once we do a app development and we deploy the app onto a server, what we don't want is like on every request from the client to the server generates all the HTML, server actually associate the script to the HTML, CSS, and then send you as a result as a response. This is time taking, this is time lag. How about you pre-build a lot of stuff, your HTML, JavaScript, CSS, along with the data that doesn't change much. It's not dynamic in nature. You build with it, you have a pre-built artifacts with you, and that HTML, that compiled HTML or built HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you host it somewhere on a CDN, which is geographically very much in proximity of your users and customers, and you will be able to get that content much, much faster, right? So there is no more generation of content at the server side. You are generating the content pre-built, and you will actually start from the CDN quite, in the proximity. So it's very fast. So with this concept, Jamstack came into picture almost 5-6 years back. And when Jamstack came into picture, there are a lot of tools, a lot of libraries that put their focus on kind of appreciating Jamstack and appreciating the concept behind it. Gatsby.js is probably one of the front runner in that. Maybe some 3, 4, or 5 years back, if I correctly recall. So Gatsby helps you to create the pre-built markup. It has its own mechanism so that it can actually run your code through, create those markups for you, and so that you can actually deploy into any CDN and serve the purpose. So it is React.js based framework. Today it has evolved a lot. Performance, I told, you are not generating your pages to the server side, is all pre-built, so performance is definitely going to be higher. It's in the CDN, kind of secured. Gatsby as a framework takes care of the SEO, your search engine optimization, just by giving you certain component and ask you to use them correctly. So your SEO has been taken care. Same, it encourages you to be highly accessible. Accessibility part also takes care. It also supports TypeScript now. Scalable, of course. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind is its plugin ecosystem. Gatsby's plugin ecosystem is huge. You name a particular utility, library, or helper, probably somebody has written a plugin for it. We have a plugin, the Docz plugin. We'll see that, right, very soon. So that's what the Gatsby is, at a very high level. So today, what we are going to do, we are going to see an application that is built using Gatsby, and then we'll get down into how Docz come into picture to document a Gatsby application, whatever you want to do documentation of the Gatsby application. So what kind of application are you planning to build today? So we are going to build an application called Hobbyland. What exactly Hobbyland is? It's a very simple application where you can create your hobbies, and you can actually rate the hobby with how serious you are about it, and you can actually edit them, delete them, and you put the ranking or weightage, and based on the ranking and weightage, it actually decides okay, this is the hobby that's kind of going on very well. This is something you just started a hobby, but you're not really picking up, and something it's going okay, kind of. So there are 3 colors that kind of differentiate each of these things. why I've created this application, not a very specific reason, but I thought this is probably the simplest one to explain and go about it. So once we have an application like this, and let's say I'm using Gatsby to create this application. Now Gatsby uses React in the background, right? So one of the thumb rule that we have all have learned from the React is like it's component-based architecture. So it means that you should be creating the component which is the smallest independent unit that can work, and that component can talk to other component can talk to other component, builds a kind of component hierarchy, and altogether builds the complete application for you. So for our Hobbyland also, we kind of envision the things to happen in the same way. So we can actually split into different components, and then we kind of call them together, build them together to build this particular app. But if I ask you, what are the reusable component that you can think of from this app? What are the components that you think that if we don't make it as a component, we probably will be repeating the code multiple times in the multiple places? I'm sure you're going to talk, at least going to talk about them, right? Heading. So you have a primary heading, then you have a secondary heading. You have a button. So the button probably is used there. You can always have a cancel button over there, or when you're in the edit mode, you can have edit button over there. You want to show them differently. So the button is a reusable component. And each of these cards that we are seeing over here, right? Each of these cards. So these cards are like, if you call them as hobby card. So each of these hobby card are kind of same. Like they have a differentiator in their data and the background color. Otherwise, the structure is almost same. They have a name, hobby name, an explanation, and what is the kind of weightage. So these are the primary reusable components that we can think of. Now, imagine like you and me developing this application, and I am kind of in a particular GitHub branch, and I'm developing the button module, and you are developing the heading module. And my next job is like I'll be taking up the secondary heading, and you will be kind of taking up the edit functionality. Now there also you need a button possibly. Now if we don't communicate like what we are doing each other, we have a chance of repeating each other's work. So the first thing is about communicating, right? Second thing is like, let's say I tell you, hey buddy, I'm doing this, and once I'm done, you are going to get this. Communication is done, but still the next thing is, how would you know how to use it? I have to sit with you, let you know, or you have to look into the code and then you have to figure it out, like how to get it done. I think those are a lot of work. Rather, when I'm developing these components, why don't I just document it in such a way that I give you the document in front of you and you can just copy paste the thing from that, right? That's really going to be cool. That's where Docz come into picture. And I think the cream on the cake is, it will also help you to build your documentation site. So it means you can actually assemble all this component documentation at one place, host it somewhere, so nobody has to locally run it. They can actually go to a URL, pick a code, start using it. So how cool that's gonna be, right? So that's what we're going to see. So right now, I'll just break from my presentation and I'm going to get into a little bit in the code structure so that I can actually explain how this application is built in the Gatsby environment. And then we straight away start talking about Docz configuration, and we'll do a live documentation coding, right after that. So that's the plan. So I'll just exit from this. All right. So if there are any questions, please feel free to stop me and ask at this point of time. So the next thing that what we are going to do, so I have an application, Gatsby application. I hope my Visual Studio Code is visible now on the screen. I have a Gatsby application now that I have created using certain commands. So I'm going to kind of show those commands. I'm not going to run them again because that's going to take a lot of time. And usually this npm install or the yarn installer is very time consuming. So I don't want to waste the time over here. It's all installed, but I'm going to kind of take you through some of the steps, over here. So we also have a parallel documentation of this one. So in case you want to refer the documentation, this is the documentation. So whatever I have covered so far, it's documented. I think I've covered at least till here. Now what we'll be getting started with, we'll be getting started with some of the installation and the setup process. I have pasted the link so you can actually start looking into it and following it. So what, as I was telling that in the Gatsby ecosystem, there are two things. One is like plugin, and there is something called a starter project. Starter project are nothing but a template project. So for example, you have a technology that is Gatsby based and you want someone to get started on this quickly. You don't want them to kind of know, like, what kind of packages to add into the package.json, what kind of configuration to be done extra. So you package them together and give them a starter project. So Gatsby has a starter project with Docz. So that starter project is over here. I'll just quickly show that. Yeah, so this is the starter project. You can actually use this project to get started with Gatsby application that has Docz support already built. Otherwise, if you want to get started from the scratch, in that case also you have to first create a Gatsby project. Then you have to install the Docz npm and then do some configurations, and then you have to get started. If you want to just bypass all these steps in between, this is the starter project that you want to create. This application that I just now spoke about, I have created it using the starter project. But while I'm explaining the application, I'll also tell you, if you want to start from scratch, what are those files and things like libraries that you require in case you want to do that, right? So first thing is you require for any Gatsby application is something called Gatsby CLI, the command line interface. So if you're using the starter project works best with 2.x version of Gatsby CLI tool. That's what I found. You can try with the latest also and see like if it works out. So first you need to install this CLI, but install this globally. So if you have never worked with Gatsby before, and if you install this one globally, what it means is like you can actually start creating many Gatsby projects using this tool. You don't have to really install it per project basis. Right, and if you have already working with Gatsby, I think this CLI must be installed in your on your desktop, on your PC already. So once this Gatsby CLI is installed, this is going to give you few commands. One of the commands is Gatsby new. So Gatsby new is a command to create a new project. So what you do, Gatsby new and then the project name. And if you omit this portion, what Gatsby is going to do, Gatsby is going to create a project skeleton for you with something which are minimally required for you to get started with Gatsby. And then if you give this URL, which is mean a starter URL, Gatsby is going to create a project for you, project skeleton for you, based on the starter project that we are going to see here. So it means all the configuration, everything together. So let's use this. Once you do this, it is going to create this project with the same name, and then you do an npm install, and after that you do a Gatsby develop. So if I show you my command prompt quickly, I am at this stage where I have just done Gatsby develop. So I have done npm install and I have done Gatsby develop. So as I've done Gatsby develop, it actually ran through. It does all this kind of building, the locally build and all. And after that, it said that, hey, your application is running on localhost 8000. So if I go ahead and access localhost 8000, I should be able to see my application running over here. So I just have to bring this localhost 8000 over here. Give me a second. Yeah. So this is localhost 8000. My application is running over here. That application that we spoke about, right? So now if I go to the code, like just to see like how what are the files of our importance and what are things that we need to look into. What you need to see here is like there's a folder called src, and inside src there are a bunch of other folders. So one folder is components. As the name suggests, we are supposed to keep all our components over here. If you are your Gatsby application, the basic application comes with this components folder with some components in it, and then you can actually, your new components, you can keep writing in the components folder. It has something called pages. I'll explain what the pages are. At this point, I have only two pages. One is index.js and 404. And then it has something called templates, and there are some utilities like, for theme, storage, color, typography kind of utility functions. So these are the basic things. Now, along with this, there are a few other things that we need to notice over here. It's like we have a folder called blog, and in this blog folder we have few MD files, if you see over here. And then apart from that, you have a static where you have this fab icon kind of stuff. And then one very important file that's called Gatsby config.js, where you have configuration of Gatsby and its plugins. So I told that Gatsby is kind of, plugin ecosystem is pretty huge, it's plugin based. So all these plugins are there. One of the plugin is Gatsby theme Docz, right? So this is Docz plugin for Gatsby to support theme. So this plugin is, we are already there as part of that starter project. If you're not using starter project, you have to install this separately and you have to add it by yourself. But in this case, it's already added. If I go to package.json once quickly, I have Docz added and Docz related libraries already added. I have Gatsby related libraries already added. So if you are starting from the scratch, you will probably see all these Gatsby related libraries, React related library already added. You have to add Docz related libraries separately by yourself. That is the extra work that you have to do. Before I move into Docz part, let's talk about the Gatsby's infrastructure a little bit deeper, so that we understand how the components kind of map to the UI that we have just now seen, right? So let's talk about. So for that, let me go to SSC folder once, and in the SSC folder, my point is from the pages. So pages in Gatsby.js determines each of the routes of your application. So by routes, I mean your application land, your route is slash. Now, if you click on something, want to go to say /blogs, your route is say /blogs. If you want to go to /about, your route is like /about, right? So for each of this route, you either create a page or you use a template to dynamically create a route. Right? There are two ways. One is the static route, one is the dynamic route in Gatsby.js. For every static routes, you put the static route in the pages itself. For me, it is a single page application. There is no other routes, only one route. So I have only one index.js where my entire code is there. There is nothing beyond that. From index.js page, what I am saying is like if you are familiar with React already, I think you will understand this quite well. It's a very simple React app where I have a simple div at the top, which is like having a link called documentation, and then I have importing a component called app. It's as simple as that. Now, if I quickly go to the application screen, this is the link documentation, and this entire thing is my app in my index.js. So as simple as that. Now, if I go and break into app is in my components folder. So let's go and see app. This is app. What this app is doing, app is having the structure is it has a component called heading. They say welcome to the Hobbyland. So if I go the app in welcome to the Hobbyland, that is the heading. Okay. After heading, it has something called a hobby form. This is the form. So this form you get to see at the left of it. This is the form. And then on the right side, you have certain thing called hobbies, track your hobbies, no hobbies, and blah blah stuff. So right side is like this hobbies, track your hobbies, and there is a loop through the hobbies. Like if you have a bunch of hobbies, you show all the hobbies using the hobby component. It is basically looping through using this map. Show all the hobbies. If you don't have any hobbies, it is showing like no hobbies, right? And there is a footer, which is you are seeing kind of at the bottom. So this is kind of a simple structure of a React application where there are a bunch of components are there, right? So if I go back and try to recollect what are the reusable component I spoke about. I spoke about one reusable component called button. I spoke about one reusable component called heading and hobby card. So let's add some hobby. Let's say teaching. Let's say I love it, and so let's say I've added it. So right now I have one hobby. So this hobbies list will have that particular one hobby, and then I'm mapping it through, getting the hobby structure, passing it to the hobby component. So my reusable components are this hobby component, and then this heading component that we have seen at the top. And inside the hobby form, there will be something called a button, this button component. These three are my reusable component that I may use it kind of elsewhere, and I don't want to repeat this code. So all these components now inside this components folder. So I have app.js and its related CSS file. Similarly, if I go to heading.js file now quickly, this heading.js file, a very simple React component which takes a label, a text, and show it inside h1 tag, and I have styled this h1 tag from the CSS. Similarly, if I go to, let's say, button is again another React component which takes a label, like that is the button text, on click handler, like a callback function, what to happen when you click on a button, the type of buttons, like I might want a button which is disabled, I want maybe a button which is like danger type, warning, yellow, red, blue, all sort of things. So based on the type, I am setting certain button type, and then if the button can be enabled or disabled, so there is a disable type. And then I'm using HTML's raw button structure, giving the class name over here, on click, and whether it's disabled or not. I'm also doing some property validations. If you see here, prop validations. For example, what are the mandatory or what is the default value? All these prop types I'm just validating over here. Why? We'll see that, because this also will carry to our documentation. We'll see that very soon. And then the last component that we want to see is the hobby component, those boxes. This is that another hobby component which takes these properties, which has a hobby's ID, name, description, and those weightage. So if the weightage you select 5, I am going basically taking this value, iterating through, and showing 5 thumbs up. If you give 3 the value, there will be 3 thumbs up. So that's pretty much it. This particular application is broken into multiple reusable components. We are getting everything in the app.js, and app.js is being used in the index.js file. That's all it is. You might be wondering, like, what is this blog post and what is this blogs then? So once you use this starter project to create the Docz starter project to create this Gatsby application, by default it comes with certain blogs, the sample blogs, sample documentation, sample blog structures, just to showcase like what is this particular app about. We are not actually dealing with any of these blog articles and things like that in our application, so we are not using them at all. So I just cut it off and put it at the side. So we have an understanding of the structure of our application, and we have seen like what is there in the Gatsby config file. For the only plugin that we are interested in from the Docz perspective is this particular plugin. There are of course other plugins, right? To read from the file system. Like if you're dealing with some markdown file, you want to pull it, translate into a HTML page. You are building a kind of logging system altogether. Then you need this file, the file system file. Like that, you have other files which we are not using in this our application, so we won't be talking much about that. Our focus is Docz. All right, so hope you understood the architecture of our application. Now what we're going to do is like we're going to move our focus a little bit towards Docz and see like how it is coming together to support the documentation. Now, one thing I have showed you already, that is you need this, this is the primary thing. And if you want to support theme, you need also this one. So these two you need to install. The starter project already has that. After this, the next important thing is this particular file. It's called Docz RC file. This is the configuration file of Docz. You need this file because without this one, your hot reloading, once you change some documentation, immediately it's taking into effect. All these things are not going to work so well. So you need this file. Without this file also, the documentation will work. But this configuration file is much, much neat for you to provide lots of customizations, lot of configurations that we are going to see. For example, we are going to title, means we are going to call our documentation as Hobbyland. So we are saying that Hobbyland is a title. In the beginning, I told that Docz uses a format called MTX. MTX is basically a combination of a Markdown and the JSX. So as it is a combination of Markdown and JSX, Markdown is one of the primary part of it. Now you will be writing all your documentation in the MTX format, which is like a markdown format. But your project might already have certain markdown files. For example, readme.md file, or code of conduct.md file, or contributing.md file, or your blogs MD file. It could be any MD files, but you don't want a documentation to be created out of those, because your focus is now to create documentation for your components, not for these things. So you just want to ignore. You want to tell Docz, hey, just ignore these files, these folders. Don't look into them to create your documentation. That's what you're going to do over here. The next thing is the accessibility, basically for user to traverse through easily through your documentation. That's where you can create bunch of menus in your documentation site. So you can create a menu called getting started, components. That's where you actually talk about this menu. You can create from this docx.crc file. And then the last thing is like you can define the theme, like what is the primary color going to be, what is the typography going to be. So that is there in the utility files, and we are pulling from there, and we're going to set it up. So I'll share a few links. Actually, it is there in the article that I've shared, that how to know more about the Docz theming and things like that. So you can always refer once you start building something. After that you can actually think about tweaking the theme and other stuff. But this is the file which is like very, very important, and you need to have in your system.